She was the woman no one noticed. The overweight single mom in a faded janitor uniform, pushing her mop down halls where students laughed, professors rushed past, and the world treated her like she was invisible. But behind her tired eyes lived a brilliant mind she'd buried under years of heartbreak, fear, and sacrifice. One rainy night, as a handsome, arrogant professor joked that he'd marry anyone who could solve his impossible equation, the room erupted in laughter, until she quietly whispered the truth no one else saw. That whisper shattered her world, and his. What followed was a storm. Humiliation, terror, a campus turning her into a joke, and a woman desperate not to break again. But when she stepped in front of hundreds to face that equation, trembling, terrified, something extraordinary happened. Chalk hit the board. Silence fell, and the whole world watched a forgotten genius come back to life. She didn't just solve the problem, she solved herself. And what came next? Love, redemption, and a twist no one could predict will make your heart explode. This is the story of how a janitor changed everything, including the man who thought she was nobody. By 8:30 at night, the lecture hall at Lakeview University was running on caffeine and nerves. Screens glowed blue. Pens tapped. At the front, Dr. Adrian Cole finished an equation that sprawled across 3 whiteboards. He was 35, tall, clean-cut, the kind of handsome that ended up on brochures. Rolled-up sleeves showed tan forearms. A loosened tie said, "I'm relaxed," even when he wasn't. Behind him, symbols tangled into something that barely looked like math anymore. Adrian capped his marker. "This," he said, tapping the board, "is one of my favorite monsters." His smile was quick and bright. "Anyone who can solve it." He spread his arms with a little bow. "I will marry on the spot." Laughter rippled through the room. A girl in the front row elbowed her friend and whispered, "Worth it." Someone whistled. Most students just stared at the equation like it was a natural disaster. Near the back wall, a woman in a Navy custodial uniform paused with her mop mid-stroke. Grace Miller's lower back ached. Her feet burned inside cheap sneakers. The polo shirt pulled tight over the soft curve of her stomach. She still had 3 rooms to clean and a bus to catch if she wanted to be home in time for her 10-year-old daughter's heart meds. She should have kept moving. Instead, her eyes ran over the symbols, rearranging them the way they hadn't in years. "Riemann tensor?" she breathed. "Compact form, with extra cruelty." She hadn't meant to speak aloud. The room had gone quiet just enough for the words to carry. Adrian's head turned. 200 pairs of eyes followed his to the plus-size woman with the mop bucket. "I'm sorry," he said lightly. "Did you have a comment?" Heat rushed up Grace's neck. Her fingers tightened on the mop handle. "No, sir, sorry. I'll be out of your way." Even to her, her voice sounded small. A boy in the second row twisted around. "Wait," he said. "What did you call it?" Grace looked at the board, then at the door. Her daughter's voice flashed through her head. "Mom, you always tell me not to be scared of math." Hypocrite, she thought. "It just looks like a Riemann tensor," she muttered. "Kind of weaponized." A few students snorted. Adrian's mouth curved. "Impressive vocabulary," he said, "for someone whose job involves industrial cleaner." The laugh that followed was thin. Grace forced her face blank and rolled the bucket toward the door. She focused on the squeak of the wheels instead of the sting in her chest. She was good at not hearing things. No one in that room knew that the janitor had once been the one at the front of a classroom, explaining monsters like that. They didn't know about the full scholarship, the PhD program in pure mathematics, the year she'd lived on coffee, chalk dust, and the joy of chasing problems that didn't have names yet. They knew the version of her in a navy polo, round and tired, who emptied bins and wiped down desks. They didn't know about Lily's diagnosis, about the words congestive heart failure in a fluorescent ER bay, about a boyfriend who promised he'd be there and then wasn't, about hospital bills that stacked higher than any proof. Grad school hadn't survived that winter. The janitor job at Lakeview came later, with health insurance and night shifts that let her get Lily to daytime appointments. Grace took the mop. She tucked the math into the back of her mind and pretended it didn't miss her. Most nights. 3 days after the marriage joke, she rolled her cart into Adrian's advanced calculus class halfway through the period. She tried to hug the back wall, moving fast, head down. The wheels squeaked anyway. A few students glanced back. Adrian's marker paused. "Could you come back later?" he asked, still facing the board. "We're in the middle of something important." Important. The word stung more than it should. "Of course, Professor," Grace said quickly. She backed the cart toward the door. Her eyes brushed the board on instinct. On the third line, a tiny minus sign sat where her brain expected a plus. It was like hearing a wrong note in a familiar song. Once she saw it, she couldn't unsee it. Her voice came out before she could swallow it. "Sorry, but that should be a plus, or your boundary condition won't hold." Silence fell hard. 20 students turned to stare at the overweight woman in the worn uniform who had just corrected their brilliant, beautiful professor. Slowly, Adrian pivoted. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "You disagree with my derivation, Ms. Miller," she managed. "Grace Miller." A student in the front row was already checking the steps on his tablet, lips moving as he followed the work. Professor Cole?" he said after a moment. "She's right. Line 3 breaks the symmetry." Color crept up along Adrian's jaw. Something in his expression went sharp. He smiled, but the warmth was gone. "Well then, Ms. Miller," he said, voice precise, "since you're so confident in your mathematics, perhaps you'd like to take a shot at Monday's little challenge. My offer still stands. Solve it, and I'll marry you myself." A few weak laughs fluttered, then died. Humiliation hit Grace hot and fast. She thought of Lily's pill bottles lined up on the counter, of scholarship letters buried in a drawer, of all the evenings she'd silently finished other people's proofs before wiping them away. Under the shame, something old stirred, hot, steady. The part of her that had once believed numbers were the one place she could be more than the girl who cleaned. Grace lifted her chin. "Give me 1 week," she said. The room held its breath. Adrian's brows rose, annoyance edged now with curiosity. "1 week," he echoed. "Try not to disappoint me." Grace rolled her cart into the hallway on unsteady legs, heart pounding. By the time the door swung shut behind her, she wasn't thinking about floors. She was thinking about a quiet corner of the library, an unused whiteboard, and a monster of an equation that, for the first time in years, made her feel awake. The Lakeview University Library was nearly empty at midnight. Just the hum of old vents, the smell of paper, and the soft whine of the floor buffer in the lobby where no one ever looked too closely at the night staff. Grace waited until the noise settled. Then she pushed her cleaning cart deeper inside, past the stacks, into the mathematics wing. Her badge unlocked the after-hours gate with a polite beep, as if it didn't realize she wasn't here to mop. The long aisle of math journals rose around her like cathedral pillars. Shadows stretched across the carpet. Her chest tightened. I don't belong here anymore. But her hand reached for the shelves anyway. One by one, she pulled down the books, topology, geometry, tensor analysis, her fingers remembering the weight. Papers she'd once studied felt like ghosts returning. She sat at a back table, the farthest from the cameras, and opened her notebook. The equation Dr. Cole had written wasn't just difficult, it was cruel. Part topology, part number theory, part theoretical physics, a Frankenstein of disciplines. It wasn't meant to be solved. It was meant to humiliate anyone foolish enough to try. Grace knew that kind of cruelty too well. She set her jaw and began. Hours slipped by. Lines filled the page, working paths, dead ends, insights that flared and fizzled. Midnight became 1 a.m., then 2. She shook out her hand as cramps formed. Sweat gathered under her collar. Her back throbbed, but her mind felt alive in a way it hadn't in years. Once, she'd been the girl who could see structure inside chaos, who could turn a snarl of symbols into something elegant. Professors had said she worked like a musician hearing harmony. She hadn't listened to that music in a long time, but now it surged back, note by note. By 4 a.m., she'd mapped out 3 possible approaches and discarded 2. The third, wild, improbable, made her pulse quicken. She wrote until the page trembled. At dawn, when the early custodial shift arrived, she shoved her papers into the supply closet behind a rack of cleaning chemicals only she touched. Then she grabbed her mop and forced her swollen ankles into motion. Day staff never noticed the dark rings under the eyes of night workers. By Wednesday, half the math department had heard about the janitor who challenged Cole. Students posted blurry photos of her in the hallway. Someone started a Reddit thread called Mop vs. Math God. Rumors spread so fast, she overheard 3 different versions of herself. A reclusive genius, a woman fresh out of prison, a Russian mathematician hiding under an assumed name. She wished any of them were true. They were all more glamorous than reality. She kept her head down, but every glance at a whiteboard tugged at her like gravity, and people watched now, whispered, snickered. Not all of it was cruel. Some looked impressed, even curious. But Grace didn't know how to hold attention that wasn't pity or irritation. She'd built her life on being invisible. Now invisibility was gone. On Thursday afternoon, she entered an empty classroom to empty bins and froze. The equation on the board was wrong. Not mathematically, but morally. It had been butchered by a class full of struggling undergraduates. She wiped the sweat from her palms. "Just empty the trash and go," she whispered. She didn't. She reached for the marker. It took 2 minutes to fix the first half of the problem. When she turned to erase her work, a voice gasped behind her. A girl filming herself for a presentation stood in the doorway, phone raised. "Oh my God," she breathed. "You really can do this." Grace's stomach dropped. "Please don't." But the girl blurted, "Could you solve the rest? For TikTok? Or like for proof? I mean, not that you have to." Grace stared at the board, at the filming phone, at the equation that practically begged her to put it out of its misery. Her shoulders sagged. "Fine, but stop recording." The girl didn't. Grace approached the board slowly, chalk in hand, the old instincts humming awake again. As soon as she started writing, she forgot the camera. She fell into the rhythm, step, justify, transform, simplify. Her voice steadied as she explained. Not to show off, but because teaching once made her feel like she mattered. 3 minutes later, the board was solved. The girl stood frozen, mouth hanging open. I'm posting this, she whispered. People need to see this. No! Grace lunged forward, but it was too late. The sound of uploaded successfully chimed like a bell tolling. By nightfall, the video had 400,000 views. By dawn, 1 million. By the next afternoon, the dean had called an emergency meeting. Dr. Adrian Cole, Lakeview's golden professor, the man who had mocked her publicly, was summoned, along with every senior mathematician. They watched the viral clip on a loop. Her approach, muttered Dr. Kwan, stunned. That trick with the hidden transform, it wasn't published until last year. Professor Elena Shaw frowned. I've seen handwriting like that on the boards some mornings. I assumed it was a shy PhD student. The dean folded his hands. Dr. Cole, you issued a public challenge. Can this woman, this custodian, actually solve the equation? Adrian's jaw tightened. I don't know. But his eyes betrayed something else. Fear. Because in the corner of his memory, he remembered the moment she corrected him effortlessly, while rolling a mop bucket, and now it was recorded for the entire world. The dean exhaled. Then we verify it. Monday morning. Public demonstration. Grace Miller, single mother, exhausted janitor, the woman the whole campus had laughed at, would now face the equation in front of hundreds. And Dr. Adrian Cole, for the first time in his career, didn't feel invincible. He felt afraid of being outshined by the woman he'd dismissed, and afraid of what it meant that he wanted her to succeed. Monday arrived with the kind of gray, heavy sky that felt like it might collapse on the city. Rain soaked the stone steps of Lakeview University, and every drip from the eaves sounded like a countdown. Grace wished she could disappear into the storm. Word of the demonstration had spread far beyond campus. Local news vans lined the quad. Students gathered in clusters, whispering, phones out. Some held signs, half joking, half serious. Team Grace Professor Cole versus the custodian queen, solve it, mama. Grace's stomach twisted. She wasn't anyone's queen. She was a tired single mother of a sick little girl, a woman who sometimes cried in the laundry room because she couldn't afford new shoes for both of them at the same time. And she was about to stand in front of 500 strangers and a world-class mathematician she'd accidentally humiliated. Her hands shook so badly, she nearly dropped her ID badge trying to clip it on. You don't have to do this, her mind whispered. Then she thought of Lily's smile, her small hands on Grace's cheeks. Mom, you're the smartest person I know. Grace swallowed hard. She walked inside. The auditorium was already overflowing. Students packed the seats, professors lined the walls, cameras perched like vultures. When Grace stepped through the door, a hush rippled through the room before whispers burst out like sparks. Oh my God, that's her. She's older than I thought. No, she looks cool, kind of badass. Is she nervous? She looks like she's gonna faint. She did feel faint. Heat crawled up her neck. Sweat dampened her palms. But then she saw him. Dr. Adrian Cole stood at the podium in a crisp charcoal suit. Dark hair combed back. A jaw you could cut glass with. Beautiful in a way that should have been illegal in academic settings. He was watching her. Not with mockery. With something like guilt. Something like respect. Maybe even fear. She tore her eyes away before she could read too much into it. The equation, his monster, covered 3 massive whiteboards. It looked worse than she remembered. Like it had grown overnight, sensing blood. A student whispered loudly, If she solves that, I'll switch majors. Another replied, Bro, you failed Algebra I. Grace forced her breathing steady. Adrian tapped the microphone. Ms. Miller, he said, his voice surprisingly soft. You stated you would present your solution today. The rules remain unchanged. His eyes flicked downward, guilty, remembering the cruelty of that joke. If you succeed, I will honor what I said. Murmurs crackled through the hall. Grace reached for the marker. Her hand trembled so violently she almost dropped it. Then she remembered her mother's voice. If you're afraid, baby, breathe. Courage isn't the lack of fear. It's moving anyway. She uncapped it. The room fell silent. The first line was agony. Her handwriting wobbled. Her throat tightened. The weight of hundreds of eyes burned her skin. But then, she reached the second line, and something shifted. The rhythm returned, like a song she hadn't heard in years, but still remembered the harmony. She forgot the room, forgot the cameras, forgot Adrian's dark, unreadable stare. The symbols became familiar terrain. She moved through them with growing confidence. Transform, extract, simplify, verify. The board filled. Her voice grew steadier as she muttered to herself, retracing steps. Minutes became half an hour. Half an hour became nearly an hour. Professors began murmuring, some excited, some stunned, some pale. Grace stepped back finally, breathing hard, sweat dampening her hairline. 5 whiteboards gleamed behind her, filled with elegant, impossible math. No one spoke. Adrian stood slowly, his jaw slackened, his breath caught, and then he whispered, almost reverent, "It's correct." The hall erupted. Applause thundered. Students rose to their feet. Cameras flashed in a frenzy. Someone shouted, "Marry him, Queen!" Grace didn't hear any of it. She only looked at Adrian, who was staring at her like a man watching his entire worldview collapse. He approached her, leaving the podium behind. Up close, his voice was barely a breath. "How did we not know who you were?" Grace's shoulders sagged. "Because you weren't looking." The auditorium quieted instantly, the audience sensing the shift. She stepped forward, her voice shaking but fierce. "I've cleaned these halls for 3 years. People hand me their trash without looking up. Professors complain when I mop too slow. Students talk about me like I don't have ears." Her eyes met Adrian's. "But I solved this not for you, not for a joke, not for marriage." She pressed her hand to her chest. "But because I wanted my daughter to see me, the real me, the one I buried under night shifts and doctor's bills and fear." Her voice broke. "For the first time in years, I wanted to believe I still existed." The room fell breathless. Adrian took a step closer. There was no arrogance in him now, only humility, regret, and something like awe. "Grace," he said softly, "you didn't just solve my equation. You solved something in me, too." Then, louder, addressing the room, "Ms. Miller is not a janitor." A pause. "She is a mathematician." Thunderous applause. Someone sobbed. Someone else chanted her name. Grace stood trembling, overwhelmed, luminous. For the first time in a decade, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. And so did Dr. Adrian Cole. 2 weeks passed, and Lakeview University was still buzzing. Professors referenced Grace in lectures. Students whispered her name with a mix of awe and pride. News outlets called her the custodian genius. Recruiters emailed the dean. Everyone wanted Grace Miller, except Grace herself. She wanted only 2 things: her daughter healthy, her life quiet, but quiet was no longer an option. Every evening after her shift, she found herself wandering, Not to the bus stop, not to the break room, but to the abandoned seminar room at the back of the mathematics building. The room with the faded carpet, the dusty chalk trays, the single lamp that flickered like it was thinking too hard. The room that had become her sanctuary. On the third evening, Dr. Adrian Cole showed up. Not with a camera, not with reporters, not with the smug arrogance she'd once hated. He came with a stack of journals, a thermos of tea, and the most disarming smile Grace had ever seen. "I thought," he said, placing the journals down gently, "we could read together. Or, you could tell me what you think of the new work in tensor theory." Grace stared at him. "Why would someone like you want to talk math with someone like me?" He hesitated. "I don't talk math with someone like you," he said quietly. "I talk math with you, Grace." The room was silent. Her heart wasn't. They fell into a routine. Every night after her shift ended, and after Lily took her medication and fell asleep at the neighbor's, Grace returned to the old seminar room. Adrian always arrived 5 minutes later, never early, never late, carrying whatever they needed that night. Textbooks, journals, printouts, takeout noodles, sometimes just a warm drink. They filled the chalkboard with symbols, arguing gently, laughing softly, discovering that their minds fit together like two halves of a proof. Grace worked methodically, structured and careful. Adrian worked instinctively, skipping steps, leaping to conclusions. Together, they were flawless. One evening, after hours of debating a particularly stubborn topological twist, they stepped back and froze. Their equations intertwined between their two halves of the board, forming something new, something elegant, something neither of them could have crafted alone. Adrian let out a slow breath. This could be a publication." Grace shook her head. "Not with my name on it. Especially with your name on it," he corrected gently. She felt heat bloom in her cheeks. "Why do you keep saying that? I'm no one." Adrian turned fully toward her, voice low, steady. "You're someone who survived things most mathematicians can't imagine. You gave up your dream for a sick daughter. You carried the weight alone. And still, you never lost that spark." His gaze softened. "You're not no one. You're extraordinary." Her breath caught. No one had ever said words like that to her. Not her professors, not Lily's father, not anyone. She cleared her throat. "What about you?" she whispered. "Why are you suddenly so human?" A wry smile tugged at his lips. "Because I met someone who forced me to see the world differently." He paused. "Someone who made me want to be better." Her eyes darted away, overwhelmed. But when she turned back, he was watching her with a tenderness she didn't know how to accept and didn't know how to refuse. Their work deepened. Their conversations deepened. So did the quiet moments between sentences, when the chalk dust hung between them, soft like snowfall, and the air felt too warm. Grace found herself telling Adrian things she'd never told anyone. How she hid old math notes in the bottom drawer. How she cried when Lily was sleeping. How she still had nightmares about losing her scholarship. How she sometimes forgot she used to be brilliant. Adrian listened like nothing in the world mattered more. Then he told her his truths. How the pressure of perfection had strangled him. How his father had measured love with achievements. How the university treated him like a trophy, not a person. How he envied her courage, her honesty, her ability to feel. And somewhere in all that sharing, something else emerged. Not romance yet. Not desire yet, but something deeper. A connection aching to be named. One night, near midnight, after hours of working through a wild conjecture, Grace proposed. Everything clicked. The final transformation slid into place as if the universe itself had been waiting for them to see it. A joint proof, a groundbreaking one. They stood side by side, staring at the elegant solution they'd built together. Grace's breath trembled. Adrian's eyes shone like he hadn't breathed in days. She whispered, "We actually did it." He smiled. Not the charming professor smile, not the media smile, a vulnerable, breathless smile. "We did," he murmured. "Together." She felt his hand brush hers, hesitant, questioning, warm. Her fingers trembled, but she didn't pull away. She let their hands slowly intertwine until there was no space left between them. For a moment, they simply stood there. Just a curvy janitor turned mathematician and a brilliant professor with something breaking open in his chest, bathed in chalk dust and quiet hope. And it felt like the beginning of a new kind of equation. One involving two variables neither of them had expected. One that might, for once, solve toward love. Ban Ja Noi, Chuang 5 Va Ket, Chat GPT Ja Noi, Chapter 5, The Solution They Never Expected, 620 words. The International Mathematics Summit in Chicago buzzed like a hive. Scholars from MIT, Stanford, Cambridge, giants Grace had once worshipped from afar, packed the grand ballroom. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead. Camera crews hovered. Whispered rumors drifted through the crowd. The janitor genius is presenting. And with Dr. Cole, did you hear they wrote a groundbreaking proof? She's the one from the viral video. Grace tugged at the hem of her navy dress. Simple, modest, borrowed from a coworker. She felt exposed in a way even the viral spotlight hadn't prepared her for. Next to her, Adrian stood in a sleek black suit, impossibly handsome, calm in a way that steadied her pulse. "You don't have to be nervous," he murmured. "I'm not nervous," she whispered back. "I'm terrified." His fingers brushed hers beneath the podium, a quiet anchor. "You belong here, Grace." Then the moderator called their names. Their presentation unfolded like a dance. Two voices, two minds, moving in harmony. Grace explained structure with her steady precision. Adrian illuminated intuition with effortless elegance. Together, they guided the crowd through the intricacies of the proof they'd built side by side in that forgotten seminar room. Midway through, Grace caught sight of a woman in the third row crying softly. It took her a moment to understand why. She wasn't seeing a janitor. She was seeing a mathematician. When they concluded, silence lingered for half a heartbeat. Then the room erupted. Thunderous applause, whistles, shouts, a standing ovation that shook the chandelier chains. Grace swallowed the tears threatening her eyes. She'd spent years being invisible. Now strangers were clapping for the mind she thought she'd lost. Afterward, professors swarmed them. Recruiters pressed business cards into her hand. Graduate directors asked whether she'd come back to school, full ride. Grace answered with polite nods, overwhelmed. Adrian stayed close, not possessively, but protectively. "She needs a moment," he said finally, guiding her away from the crowd, out toward the lobby where soft snow drifted against tall windows. When they stepped into the quiet, she exhaled shakily. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why me? Why now?" Adrian turned to her fully. "Because you're brilliant. Because you're brave. Because you're more than the world ever allowed you to be." His voice softened. "And because somewhere along the way, you changed me." She looked up, stunned. I changed you? He smiled, raw, honest, without the professor mask. You made me human. Her breath caught. Snowflakes floated beyond the glass. The world felt strangely still. Then he took both her hands. Grace Miller, he said quietly. That night when I joked about marrying whoever solved that impossible equation, I had no idea I was speaking to the one person who would rewrite the entire trajectory of my life. She froze. His eyes held hers. You solved my equation, he continued. But more than that, you solved me, my pride, my ego, my emptiness. You showed me what real intelligence looks like, what real courage looks like. Her heart thudded so loudly she was sure he heard it. He dropped to one knee. Grace gasped. Adrian! He pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a simple silver ring, beautiful not because of its sparkle, but because it looked chosen with intention. Grace, he said softly, I don't want to marry you because of a challenge. He swallowed. I want to marry you because you're the constant I didn't know I'd been solving for. Her vision blurred. All the nights cleaning, all the tears in hospital waiting rooms, all the years believing she wasn't enough, collapsed into this single, impossible moment. Yes, she whispered, voice cracking. Adrian, yes. He stood. He kissed her, gentle at first, then certain. The ballroom behind them erupted with applause from those who'd witnessed the moment. But Grace barely heard it. For the first time in her life, she felt whole. Epilogue. The final proof. 6 months later, Lakeview University filled the same auditorium where Grace had once stood trembling with a marker in hand. This time she stood at the podium as Dr. Grace Miller, research fellow, her name freshly printed on her office door. Her daughter Lily sat in the front row, wearing a sparkly dress and clapping wildly. Adrian stood beside her, not as a savior, not as a professor above her, but as her equal, her partner, her future. When she gave her short acceptance speech, she ended with, "We spend so much time looking down or looking up. We should look straight ahead, because brilliance can come from anywhere, and humanity should come from everyone." The crowd rose to their feet. Lily ran onto the stage and hugged her. Adrian wrapped his arm around them both. Two mathematicians, one little girl with a healing heart, and a life built not on equations, but on choosing each other. The problem of love, at last, had its solution. Simple, elegant, and infinite.